Hello, I'm John Self, and welcome to a special report of Guiding Your Career. Guiding Your Career is a daily newsletter designed for people who have an interest in advancing their career. It provides information and insight, and it's available around 7 a.m. Central Time, Monday through Friday. We hope you'll take a look at our website on Substack for Guiding Your Career and become a subscriber. Thanks. Today, we're going to focus on an important issue related to the economy, and that is the build-out of AI. Now, I know a lot of people say, "Stop, John. What does this have to do with my career? What does this have to do with finding a job?" Well, quite a bit, actually, and we're going to talk about that today. Not to stoke fears and apprehensions, but to give you some background so that you can be ready to respond if we have another 2008 bubble bursting, as they say, and it looks like that's going to happen based on some just basic math. Recently, a company announced that they wanted to build a large, high-speed data center in the Terrell, Texas area, about 10 to 12 miles away, near the Kaufman-Hunt County line. And this would, although it has been initially turned down, they're still pursuing it. The city of Terrell has said that they do not object if they use power that's what we call behind the grid. In other words, gas-powered turbines. And if you live anywhere near that data center, that could be a kind of a noisy proposition. But the long and short of it is some communities are embracing this, some communities are not. A lot of it has to do with the taxing on the power grid and the use of water, because these centers are very, very hot. They have to use a lot of water to cool the machinery. And so there are a lot of factors coming into this. But the problem is there are companies out there that are building these high-speed chips, and there are superscalers who are trying to be first to win the battle. They feel like if they cross the finish line first as the preeminent provider of AI compute capacity, then they will dominate and they will make their shareholders a lot of money. But to get there, they're going deeply, deeply into debt. And that brings us back to 2008. When a lot of people saw that opportunity to make home ownership available to people that couldn't normally cross the threshold of affordability. And so they began doing questionable real estate mortgage practices. You don't have an income? Okay, we'll figure this out later. Okay, you can't afford this house? Well, we'll put it on a rate so that you can afford it to get started, but then you're going to have to pay for it later with the interest when the interest rate goes up. And we all knew that blew up. And then you had people running around saying, "Oh, no, we didn't understand this, and we can't afford this, and our businesses are going to be wiped out." And while the government did not go in and rescue specific mortgage brokers, and they shouldn't have, they did have to end up having to get knee-deep in the mess that Wall Street created by syndicating these loans that were not up to snuff. They were not investment grade. And so you heard a lot of the use of the term moral hazard. And moral hazard is basically a term to say this is when a business or a customer takes on more risk because they know another party will cover the cost if things go wrong. And Congress ended up having to cover a lot of the cost to keep the country from plummeting into a great recession. A Great Depression. There was a lot of bailouts of companies that were adversely affected by the decline in the marketplace. You had 10 million jobs disappear. I remember sitting in my lobby of my building when I was running an executive search firm in Dallas, and all these bankers coming down from the top floor penthouse, where a division of Lehman Brothers had a private banking operation, and they all had their little boxes with all their personal possessions. Dozens and dozens were told they no longer have a job because of the real estate meltdown. And the real estate meltdown occurred because it had become so involved in the stock market, in retirement plans, everything. It just very quietly crept in. How did that happen? Well, the mortgage companies didn't keep the mortgages they wrote. They sold them to investors through investment banks, who then pulled them together with a lot of garbage loans and sold them as, and had the ratings agency rate them as A-plus investment tools. And so a lot of retirement plans bought these tranches of mortgages that did have some good mortgage in the tranche, but there was a lot of garbage from these people. They were, we need to help these people find a house. And it was, a noble thing to do in a very unethical way. They tried to do it in a very unethical way, and a lot of people got burned. So that's the definition of moral hazard. It allows people to take risks they should not take, would not normally take, because they know somebody else will come along and clean up their mess, and they won't be responsible. Now, it's today, as we hear Wall Street talk about this AI boom, this AI bubble, it is as if Wall Street bankers, investors do not remember what happened in 2008. I mean, this was painful. A lot of people lost a lot of their retirement. There are people still working today because they lost so much in their retirement plan because of a lot of investments from these tranches of real estate loans. And don't worry, real estate prices never go down. Oh, really? Well, today we have something called circular financing, where chip makers like NVIDIA are loaning money to companies, hyperscalers, to buy their chips for these data centers, and then loaning those companies the money to buy those chips. In other words, NVIDIA is on both ends of the transaction. They're selling chips, and they're providing financing for the chips they just sold. That's if that's not a concern, it should be. Why? Because if anybody starts defaulting, then companies like NVIDIA and others that are involved in this will take a financial hit. And how many people, because NVIDIA is such a high flyer, how many companies, how many retirement plans or whatever are invested in NVIDIA stock? And if it goes down, it will be a catastrophe. And the scale is a lot worse. Now, why does this happen? Why does this continue to happen? John Mack, who was a great investment banker, one of the really good guys, who was at one point at Credit Suisse First Boston, and then he moved over to Morgan Stanley. He said, we can't help ourselves. In other words, there is so much money in the system. These deals can be so lucrative for the associates in terms of bonuses, commissions, end of the year bonuses, partnerships, etc. And so they came up with ways to get these deals done, and then convince themselves that the financing they're providing or the structure of these deals, it's okay because we're doing good work, and we're going to sell them down the street at a favorable rating from the rating services, and so we're going to get it off our books, and so we're not going to be responsible. Well, Mack saw that as a recurring challenge in the investment bank industry, and that's why he said to Congress, help us, because we cannot help ourselves. And we are, in fact, seeing history repeat itself. The big run-up to real estate was all based on the fact that, hey, everybody deserves a house, a part of the American dream, and, hey, real estate prices don't go down until they start going down. There are thousands and thousands of homes, and because the market is slowing already, the market's already slowing. There are thousands and thousands of homes in Houston, Texas alone, and in fact throughout Texas, in metropolitan areas that are going unsold. The great Texas miracle may be about to go belly up. It just is a normal economic cycle. Now, we hadn't even started factoring in what AI would do if it suddenly goes south, and what that will do to an already slowing economy. But the run-up to the AI deal, is they all sound invincible, just like the real estate people, and they all believe that the prices are going to keep going up. And what they can't tell you with any certainty is that, okay, all of this money that we're investing in AI, the business model is going to generate enough revenue to help us get our money back with interest. They can't tell you that yet. So they're making these huge bets with no concrete evidence that it can be paid back. And again, as these companies, feel the greed from Wall Street, investors want more money, they want more top-line sales. There's a lot of pressure, and that will lead to more robust risk profiles. Companies will take chances they shouldn't or wouldn't normally take. And these fees can be astounding. I mean, young bankers can, at the end of the year, if they have a good year packaging this stuff, can make a bonus of $2 or $3 million. That's extraordinary. They always call the bonus season, which is around Christmas. The Rolex dealers around Wall Street always look forward to that because that's where they have record sales. All the young bankers with their new found wealth, first thing they do is buy a high-end Rolex watch. It's a point of arrival. Now, let's go into this technology a bit and the cost structure. When factoring the technology, to build out these servers, the GPUs and high-performance networks, and operational overhead, to build them out and to operate it, to get all the equipment in place and the chips and to program, the total cost of ownership, TCO, surges dramatically to somewhere between 38 to 60 billion each. That's a huge amount of money. And you're then facing that, roughly anywhere from $300 to $900 million a year in operating expenses, chip replacement, replacing the servers, etc. This whole technology with the large language models require enormous compute power. And that's what's, because it needs that, and because we want to be first in AI and we're incentivizing the nation to move in that direction, that is driving the frenzy to build out these centers, because without these centers in the U.S. models, they won't work. And so now, we've created the right mix, the right brew to have another financial crisis. The broader global estimates, we're not the only people involved in this. It's becoming a worldwide phenomenon. But if you talk about all the lending, all the borrowing that's going on in AI alone, it's over $1 trillion for this year alone. Now, why do we care about that? Well, AI borrowing is competing with other corporate needs, as well as the U.S. government's need to finance its bond to keep paying off our debt. And then the question then becomes, will there be enough capital in the marketplace? This is separate. Whether OpenAI can fund pay the debt, pay the piper, which is Oracle, their big hyperscaler, if they can afford to pay them. That's a big, critical, scary issue. But the next big scary issue is, will there be enough money left in the marketplace for the government to refinance its obligations? The U.S. refinances its debt every week. Every week there's an auction, or most every week. And so they depend on refinancing for people coming into the table and buying the bonds. And when times are concerned, or the bondholders are worried about, let's say, an AI bubble, they may want more money for the risk they're taking. If they worry about the U.S.'s ability to pay its debt, they're going to want a higher rate of interest. And that trickles down through the whole economy. If you have higher interest rates in your bonds, particularly your 10-year, you're going to see higher rates in mortgages and car loans and working capital loans, et cetera. It drives up the cost. It's inflationary, but it also is an impediment for business to work well. So this is really, really important. And again, what makes this so dangerous in terms of the financing is that the GPUs running are heavy. They work at heavy workloads, and they have high utilization, and it's a lot of stress, operational stress to the chips. So particularly the question is, how long will these chips last? How long will they last before they're renewed with the latest, greatest new stuff? What will it cost to upgrade the chips every time they're replaced with newer, greater stuff? A lot of times when you talk about the equipment and the chips, the depreciation cycle in some of the big corporations is 5, 6, 7 years. The concern is that the depreciation cycle on these high energy, high sophistication chips in the compute center is 2 to 3 years. So not only are they extraordinarily expensive to buy each chip that now you have to finance, but then you're going to have to do it more often on a regular basis. And so industry critics and technical analysts argue that the true economic or useful shelf life is probably, as I said, close to 2 to 3 years. So that's going to change your projected expense profile. If they say it was probably going to be 300, 400 million, but what happens if you're every 18 months to do 20? In order to be competitive, you have to buy a whole new rack of chips, thousands of chips for one data center. What does that do to your cost projection? What happens when suddenly the operators of the centers aren't, they can't get paid for the loans they put together to build the center? What happens? What's the trickle-down effect on the economy? But I think the other thing is that we see this has incredible downstream technological implications. The unresolved question, and this is really significant, is with these expensive chips and abbreviated depreciation cycle, can these businesses generate enough revenue to fund operations and to sustain their debt? And that is a big question mark. That's not, oh, maybe not. I mean, it is a blank sheet. Nobody knows for sure. Nobody knows for sure. And in fact, some cases today, they say that looks very unlikely. Now, we have another issue. China, who is becoming more forthright geopolitical rival to the United States, they have done their own approach they've started their own approach to AI technology. And you saw the first introduction a year or two ago called DeepSeek, and it rattled the U.S. markets. Why? Because it was very powerful, very easy to use, and a lot less expensive to operate. It did not need as much compute power as the American systems. And that means they can be purchased cheaper, operated cheaper. U.S. businesses are loyal to U.S. businesses who supply them as long as it makes sense. In other words, they're loyal until they're not. And I think China has created these lower cost chips, and I think that's going to be significant. Now let's double back and talk about the financing again, because I think a lot of people, really know, they kind of hear what it means, but you need to see this play out because this is an actual deal. We're going to we've diagrammed for you, and it shows how things are connected. And this is not a one-off deal. These happen every week. A question is whether the people that are getting loans to buy the chips and getting loans to build out the centers, will there be enough revenue for the services to pay the piper? Can they pay back their money they borrowed? And that is really, really essential. I think sometimes I have this impression, and I'm not the only one. There are a lot of people, professionals on Wall Street, and I'm certainly not that, who believe that a lot of these people are making deals that don't make any sense because they think the government will bail them out again. Moral hazard is returning. And I think this is like the real estate hucksters of 2008. There are people out there that are making wild, crazy deals. And, it's sort of like a guy buying a Bentley that has just started a job. He's earning $30,000 a year. I mean, it's kind of that crazy. So let's talk about this transaction. On the far left side, you have NVIDIA, arguably a brilliant company, one of the most innovative in the world, and it is the darling of Wall Street. Okay, yesterday they reported earnings, and it was a blowout. They have sold more chips, the demand is high, and everybody thinks that means that the industry is healthy. No, it doesn't. It means that they've sold a lot of chips. It doesn't mean that the chips are going to produce a lot of revenue to service the debt, to make it all make sense. But right now, NVIDIA is the darling. Okay, so they have to worry about their sales too, because Wall Street is looking over their shoulder. We need to see you earn more. If you don't do this, if it's not quite enough, their stock price, takes a hit. And there are a lot of people inside these companies, young kids out of college that are worth $25 million because they got stock. Okay. So Shell buys the Shell company. Now this is a company created not by NVIDIA, and it buys for $5.4 billion worth of NVIDIA chips. $5.4 million. They're buying chips from NVIDIA. NVIDIA is loaning that Shell company the money to buy the chips. So NVIDIA now books the chips sale, and they book the revenue. Okay, so it was a profitable quarter, profitable transaction. And that's what they were reporting yesterday. I mean, record blowout number. How much of this is really organic sales and how much of this is circular financing? Because that's important. And a lot of this demand is propped up with circular financing. So NVIDIA loans the money to a shell to buy the chips that they sold to the shell. Okay? Then along comes a company called Apollo. And Apollo Global, which is a big hedge fund, investment fund, they buy the loan from the shell company, okay? Maybe probably multiple loans that have occurred. And so Apollo takes it off those books. So nothing that's happened so far is illegal. It may be questionable, it may be suspect, but it's not illegal as long as the parties to the transactions disclose completely in the prospectus. So now Apollo comes along. They buy this debt off of the shell company, and then they repackage it as an A+ investment and sell it to Athene. Now, who is Athene, you ask? Well, Athene is an insurance company owned by Apollo, and Athene they then package this up and market it to, yes, you guessed it, retirement funds. So if anything happens along the way, now nobody knows where the chips are. I think they're probably in that Kansas or Tennessee data center that Elon Musk operates. His Grok chips there, his hyperscaler chips in that data center, and that's probably where those chips are from the thing that came originally from NVIDIA to the shell company to Apollo. I think they got sent off to Elon Musk. But these transactions are legal because they're being disclosed. But here's the problem. Athene moves the shell company transaction to a company they've set up in the Caribbean to manage the data, manage the money, manage the cash flows, etc. And what that does is put that beyond U.S. securities firms, the security regulations, because you don't have to disclose a lot of information if you're based in the Caribbean. It sounds a little bit like some of the stuff that happened in 2008. Now, the NVIDIA transaction, again, is an example of what investors are calling circular financing, okay? You know, they sell the chips, they finance the sale, then they push it off on someone else who then sells it to one of their subsidiaries, and then they move it over to investment. They sell it to retirement plans so that executives and managers can profit as that investment grows, assuming it grows. It didn't grow during the health benefit because the real estate boom, because so many of these deals were bad deals. Now these are NVIDIA makes good products. The question is not whether the product's going to work. The question is whether the business model for large language models and these huge costly data centers, whether that makes any sense. And again, there's a lot of debate about that, and a lot of people don't think so. So, there are other hyperscalers in the space are, they're loaning money and they're competing for money. And some people, they're using private credit sources. So it becomes not a transaction we can always see. Sometimes it becomes very opaque. And again, you got to remember this. Currently, OpenAI cannot currently meet its future debt service obligations for the transactions they've arranged with Oracle. Okay? And if OpenAI stumbles, and there are a lot of people believe it'll be the first one to stumble, Oracle, a former tech, one of the prince firms of, of the tech industry, which has been loaning OpenAI money left, right, and center in anticipation of getting all of the data center work, they would be in significant trouble, okay? Probably a Chapter 11 bankruptcy and maybe even liquidation. Last Sunday, Fareed Zakaria opened the door on another kind of wrinkle to this process, and that is China. And this is a short video. Stay with it because it's got some great information.
Struggle for global supremacy between the U.S. and China has reached new heights during Trump's second term, and nowhere is this more evident than in the race to lead the world in AI. While Silicon Valley remains dominant, last month the Chinese startup Moonshot released an AI model that rivals those from Anthropic and OpenAI. AI has also been widely incorporated into everyday life in China, from robot cashiers to highly advanced surveillance systems. So, how has China managed such feats? I'm joined by Evan Osnos, staff writer at The New Yorker, longtime China watcher who lived there for 8 years. Welcome, Evan. You went back and shed some light on this question that many people were wondering about, which is China spends maybe a tenth as much as the US on data centers. It doesn't have the most advanced computer chips, and yet its best models seem very close to the best American models, maybe 6 months away. How has it managed to do this?
Well, this has caught Americans by surprise a couple of times over the last couple of years. Remember, there was, of course, the DeepSeek moment. This was the first time a Chinese model was demonstrating that kind of capability, and then most recently from a firm called Moonshot. And this is especially striking because they have less capital at their command. There are export controls, of course, on some of the most powerful chips in the world. So, look, they have been accused by American AI makers of what's called distillation, of essentially unfairly copying American products. And at the same time, there is a recognition now across Silicon Valley and in Washington that China has been able to make much faster gains than we had expected. And I think that's partly because of a kind of focus at the leadership level. They have been dedicated to this really for 10 years. And this 10-year period for Reed turns out to be decisive because they have been able to make much faster progress than the United States expected.
And they have. What are the three things you need for AI? You need compute, that is chips. You need energy, and you need human talent. And it seems to me that China has lots of human talent at the very highest levels in computer science. It clearly has much more energy. I think it has 10 times as much installed electricity than the United States, or some such number. What it didn't have was the most advanced computer chips. What did they say about how they got around? Is it that they're managing to get it in because they import it via, Southeast Asian countries, or is it that the indigenous chips are good enough to get them a long way?
It's a combination of both of those, but it is also a larger strategic shift. In some ways, this is a story that started during the first Trump term. That was a period when, you'll recall, the first trade war was a real wake-up call in Beijing, because they said to themselves, look, we are entering a period of greater strategic competition with the United States. We have to become more self-reliant. We don't want to have to rely on them as much as we do now. There was, at the moment, there was a kind of memorable contrast where the United States under Donald Trump the first time was setting aside what had been the first federal plan for AI. And at the same time, because it had been conceived under the Obama administration, but at the same time, China was adopting its first federal plan for AI. And 10 years later, we see some of the fruits of that. So look, I think even if you set aside the hype, and China is very good at hype, we have to be clear-eyed about the progress they've made, or we're going to be caught flat-footed.
Is it also possible that this whole idea of a race is kind of misconceived, because we're going to have AI, they're going to have AI, the whole world is going to use AI for all kinds of things? If people often make the electricity analogy, it seems to me nobody really won the electricity race, even though Thomas Edison did start it and he built a company, General Electric, that did well. But the Soviet Union electrified. What do you think of the idea of this as a race, and do the Chinese think of it as a race?
Yeah, in some ways, the conversation in Silicon Valley is very different than the conversation you hear in places like Beijing and Shanghai. In Silicon Valley, there's a lot of talk about achieving artificial general intelligence or a decisive strategic advantage. The idea that there might be some day where we cross the tape and therefore the game is ours. In Beijing, they see it quite differently. They say what we're doing is trying to get it out into the economy already as diffused as possible. And I saw it on the ground. Look, you can go to a Chinese car factory today, and you'll see that they have made this shift towards robots much more decisively than we have in the United States. There's a lot of pros and cons to that. I'm not saying, Fareed, this is an unambiguous good, but it is giving them an economic advantage that we're wise to take seriously. That means their unit per production is lower. And that means then that they're more competitive around the world. And that in some ways is the ball game, is not just in this US-China race, as you say, but it's in developing countries. It's in Africa and Latin America and many other places to come.
Evan Osnos, always a pleasure to hear from you. Come back soon.
Thanks, Fareed. Glad.
And so now we have a sense that we are competing with financing in the United States. We're spending a lot of money at this, and yet across the ocean, our geopolitical competitor, China, is generating a lower cost alternative. And one of the things that's very true about American business and capitalism is they will seek out the lower cost to reduce expenses so they can maximize shareholder value. And I think this is really interesting. We have two competing visions for AI. And so how does this shape the job market? And I think this is a key question. There are so many things in the current AI bubbles ecosystem in the United States that could break down and create financial havoc, which would adversely affect the job market. But one of the other threats is that the U.S. Product is too expensive to buy and to operate, and so companies will begin buying lower cost large language model alternatives from places like China. And the answer matters economically and for the future of employment, because either way, if there's big disruption financially, that will spill over into the job market. Circular financing, again, is so much like what we see in 2008. If the link breaks, the rest of the chain could be damaged adversely to the point of creating a large global or at least domestic economic disaster. It would generate large loan defaults and will cascade throughout the economy. And I think this also will impact the bond market, which has got the bond market's they're looking at the United States needing to refinance, trillions of dollars in debt over the next 8 to 10 years. And the question is, will the United States be able to do that? Any breakdown, any disruption by China could accelerate job disruption. And I think, so as we wrap up today, there's this couple of things that I keep talking about, and people keep, they don't disagree, but they don't act. This could get really challenging and could adversely affect your life, your ability to have a lifestyle, your ability to take care of your family and your kids. It may not happen, but the potential is real. And I think widespread job disruptions will make finding a new job much harder. So let's just back up right there for a second and say, okay, so if we have a disruption or these large language models there, the financing breaks down and creates a recession. Okay, but what if that doesn't happen? Well, let's assume what happens if they work really, really well. There will be tons of layoffs because companies will look for any opportunity to reduce their expenses. The other day, a CEO described his employees as a labor tax. A labor tax. That tells you where a lot of corporate thinking is. They're standing on the sidelines right now saying, oh, don't worry. This is just about improving productivity, which has always been a C-suite code word for layoffs. And if the U.S. language models work and the financing works, guess what? You're still at risk because they will find ways to implement in ways that will eliminate jobs. And we continue to look very, very carefully at what jobs will legitimately be eliminated. And when you start thinking about entry-level lawyers, entry-level radiologists in the healthcare system, entry-level pathologists who specialize in reading reports, not doing the science, but reading the science. These are all jobs at the CEO level or at the white-collar level that will be eliminated. And Bill Gates has released an essay this past week, which he really trumpets that this is very, very real. It's a very real possibility that these things will happen. Targeting future employers, people that, potential colleagues that can help strengthen your network, people who will share intelligence with you. Now, you also have to think about what industries will be less affected by a successful AI implementation, and those would probably be the ones that you would want to focus on. One of the things I encourage you not to do is sit around and say, that's not going to happen. It won't happen to me. And that has been a theme that's repeated over and over across this country's history and economic ups and downs. Don't allow the problem to be worse because you didn't think ahead and plan ahead. And some of these planning, exercises may say, okay, my job's going to be fairly stable. It's not going to be AI at risk for the immediate future, but my employer may not be around. So what's my strategy if my employer decides that they can't survive or they sell off and I lose my job in a consolidation? Do you have a plan? Do you know other companies that might hire you? Have you built any relationships? Are you going to meetings? Are you visible in your industry and writing and speaking? All of these things are important, and you can't wait for the axe to fall, if you'll pardon the expression, before you decide, oh, I need to strengthen my brand. I need to be more visible. That's too late. So, anxiously waiting for the other shoe to drop is really an unwise career management lesson. I hope this information has been helpful. It'll be it's posted on our site at substack.com, and we'll be generating other information from this. Thanks so much. Have a great day. And if I can get you to consider one thing, our newsletter is usually written Monday through Friday at 7 a.m., and I hope that you will consider signing up. And tomorrow morning, we'll have a weekly summary of short videos we've collected that really are designed to help you think about ideas of your career management, what's happening in leadership, all of those things that I think put together will help you advance your career. So that will come out in the morning. It's called it's the Weekend Roundup, and the newsletter is just a series of short 1, 2, 3, 4-minute videos with ideas that hopefully will get you to think about your own future. And you will periodically see these attachments to our newsletter. It encourages you to subscribe. And we offer some benefits to annual subscribers, including some big discounts on career coaching and helping people plan for, what could be an unpleasant experience, and that's job loss or career change. And that's career change is going to be something that a lot of people are going to have to think about if they are in a job segment that is very at risk for AI. So thank you very much for joining us today. See you next time.